Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Haley Yates. I am the UBA Manager of Strategic Solutions. And on behalf of United Benefit Advisors and Benecon, I welcome you to today's presentation in our UBA Employee Benefit Webinar Series. Today's topic is Signs It Is Time to Move to Self-Funded. And our presenter today is Brintan Madonna, who is the Executive VP of Sales and Producer Services at Benecon. So Britt, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Haley. Sorry, I have such a long title here. I need to consolidate it. A pleasure to be with you all here this afternoon. Excited to share kind of just a topic that I've spent my entire career in. And just for those of you that are not familiar with me, we've been a great partner, strategic partner, and blessed with the alliance that we have with UBA. So with that, I've been with Benecon 17 years. Prior to that, I worked in the TPA space, so about 20 years. I've focused and specifically been involved on healthcare and specifically self-funding. So let's dive in. So signs it's time to move self-funded. My goal is really to go through kind of the trends, what we're seeing, and we'll go through kind of just overall terminology. And then lastly, we'll talk about the time, right? Like when is that transition time for an employer? And when it's in their best interest, when it's in your best interest as a consultant to be spending time to educate on self-funding. So let's talk about trends. Why are we here? I spend a lot of time analyzing the Kaiser Family Foundation and their data. My dad was a statistician, pollster. That's what I've been worked into my brain with. And ideally, I love to see what kind of is driving any type of stat and whether we can pull any type of, I would say, conclusions out of the data. One conclusion we can easily pull, and we don't even need stats to do that, is that self-funding has been on the rise, and particularly to the smaller employer base. But you can see here, this is the Kaiser Family Foundation data. It's pretty easy. Go on kff.org. You can run all kinds of different reports. I'd encourage you all to look there to see whether or not any type of benchmarking things. UBA has a great benchmarking solution too, as well. I have to make sure I plug that because there's great data that comes out of there. But when you look at self-funding and looking at it on a national basis, you can see here that all employers 1,000 plus or greater, we've seen almost a 30% rise. And the reason for that is typically employers 1,000 plus or greater, their claims data is much more predictable. When you look at just true self-funding, you'll see here that the smaller employer size, that 3 to 199 has grown, but not at the rate of the 1,000 plus. We're going to talk about that here later in the presentation. This is true self-funding. This is what Kaiser measured over 30 years of just self-funding, not level funding. So let's talk about level funding. In 2018 is when Kaiser really started managing measuring level funding. And you can see here, look at this unbelievable rise. And again, why we're here today. In 2018, 19% were covered in a self-funded or level funded plan. This is specifically employers 3 to 199. Okay. And now look at it, 2023, we're up to 45%. The growth of self-funding and level funding, and I would even wager, again, when you look at this, the people that said that they were in a self-funded plan are most likely in a level funded plan. But you can see the growth that's occurred here over level funding. And again, just why we're seeing this migration, this trend. I want to break it out in one more piece. The 50 to 199. We have almost 50% of the employer base in a self-funded or level funded plan today. So the growth of level funding, which is in most cases a self-funded plan, for what we're talking about today, I'm going to classify it in a self-funded plan, is just drastically boomed. And it's incredible to see the increase in why groups are going that way. And ultimately, just as carriers are positioning themselves in a self-funded, level funded market. So let's talk about the different funding models. We're going to talk about terminology here, right? Most of you are familiar with the fully insured environment. We're going to go through kind of the definitions of these, but we used to have this called the spectrum of risk, and fully insured would be way over here in low risk, and self-funded would be way over on the other side and say extremely risky. That's not the case anymore. The reason for that is the fully insured market is often pricing now for your experience, especially when you're over 50 employees. So what are we seeing? We're seeing more volatility. We're seeing groups moving into self-funded spaces because of a lot of different reasons, which we'll get into. But that risk spectrum isn't what it used to be. Okay, it used to always call it community rated in the fully insured or manual rated in the fully insured. That's not the case. So I've used now kind of a pie instead of that risk spectrum, because I think all of them have their risks and all of them have their pros and cons. But fully insured, right? We're all familiar with them, with those types of plans. We'll define that. Level funded or carrier level funded products are out there. Standalone stop loss products are out there as well. Both of those are self-funded, and then captives and consortiums are out there as well. So those are all different types of products that are in the market, which has caused this, again, surge in self-funding and level funded products. At one point, it was just fully insured and self-funded, but it's changed so much over the years. So what's a fully insured plan? A fully insured plan is basically where an employer contracts with a carrier or an insurance company and says, you're taking all of the financial responsibility for the cost of my plan, of all of our employees, right? So if an employee has a $500,000 claim, they're taking the risk, right? That's what you're basically saying in a fully insured environment, all right? A self-funded plan, by definition, is basically where the employer is assuming the financial responsibility of the cost for the medical claims, all right? Now, before we get into the second part of this definition, a self-funded plan, by definition, is saying employer ABC. If someone has a claim, the employer is responsible for it. Okay. Now, if you want, in a self-funded plan, you can purchase guide rails on that. So often employers will buy a contract through a third party or administrative services only. That's your carrier. That's your Blue Cross Blue Shield. That's your Aetna, your Cigna, United, whoever it may be. And then in addition, some employers may buy stop loss. Okay, we're going to talk about stop loss. That's the insurance piece. We're going to dive into that a little bit later. But a true self-funded plan, by definition, is that the employer is assuming the financial responsibility of the cost for their claims. All right, that's medical and RX in this, as we're talking about today. So that's the definition. I'm going to take a quick sip as we continue here. All right, and I do want to just, again, as anyone has any questions as we walk through this, feel free to type them in to the Q&A. We will address them at the end. But the goal, again, from today is that as employers, we get well-versed in the terminology. Again, we also see what's happening from a trend standpoint. So I'm hopeful that everyone that's attending today definitely feels like they've gained knowledge through the presentation. So again, if there's certain terminologies or things that I'm using, it's because I've been in this industry and it just comes natural. So just stop me, just shoot a question over and I'll stop. But kind of using a visual, I'm a visual learner. When we think about fully insured and self-funded plans, this is kind of what it looks like. All right, you're fully insured, you have a fixed premium, you're paying a premium. So I'm going to use an example of $1 million. Let's say you're 100 employees, your healthcare is $1 million. You're paying $1 million for a health plan through a Blues, United, Cigna, whoever it may be. All right, they're taking the risk for the claims. You're going to say, I have a deductible for all my employees of $2,000. They're going to give you a price for that. That's a fully insured environment. Okay, a self-funded, you still have that fixed cost, but now you have claims and you're responsible for that. In a self-funded, you may have the fixed cost, I should say. All right, it would be recommended, unless you're over thousands and thousands of employees, not to buy insurance or buy a network. So this is kind of the breakdown. All right. All of your costs in the self-funded plan are built into your fully insured. In fact, in some environments, you have less in a self-funded plan than you do in a fully insured. All right. So we're trying to make this, again, I would say a little bit easier to understand. There are a fair amount of components that go into a self-funded plan. We're going to walk through each of these pieces here. This is a standard self-funded plan that I would say for the majority of the market. Okay. You have your administrative fund, you have your stop loss, you have your claim fund. All right. We're going to walk through all of these pieces. All right. So the ASO or TPA, this is the terminology you often hear, right? That's the first piece that you're typically buying. You're buying a network. And so you're going out and you're going to the Blues, you're going to whoever, and you're either buying an administrative only plan where, again, no risk, they're just processing claims for your employees. So as an example, if your employee has $1,000 claim, if they have a discount of 50%, you as an employer would then be responsible for $500, right? It's the same way as a third-party administrator. Often a third-party administrator is not employed by the carrier, all right? So they're an independent in some cases of a Blues, Aetna, United, and they use their network. They often offer other types of plans, network plans, probably reference-based pricing, if some of you've heard of that terminology, value-based arrangements, all different metrics to pay the providers. All right. Just real quick on reference-based and value, a lot of those are set based off of Medicare's reimbursable or allowable rate. Okay. I can dive into any questions on those two types of plans, but for today, we'll keep it more high level. The second piece of your administrative fund, and again, as you look at the top right-hand corner, anything blue is considered fixed cost. All right. So as we think about administrative fund, often you have broker consultant fees, you have your cost containment solutions, data analytics, compliance, actuarial fees, things like that are in your management fees of the program, right? You want to pay a consultant to educate on your plan, to make sure they're doing, looking at your data. There's all different things when you're in a self-funded plan that you need a consultant to help you educate you and your employees, more than often sometimes in a fully insured environment. I also love to look at the cost containment solutions, see what potential is driving your health plan and see whether there's things you can do. It all comes down to data. In a fully insured environment, you're often receiving little data that comes from the carrier. When you're in a self-funded environment, you can go out and purchase a data analytics software that will analyze your data. And then lastly, right, you want to make sure, since you are taking on that financial responsibility, that you are in compliance. So these are all things that are part. This is not an exhaustive list. You can continue other parts of your plan depending on how it's structured. All right. So as we think about stop loss, again, if you're self-funded, you don't have to buy stop loss. It would be very wise of you if you have less than 1,000 employees to definitely buy stop loss. Even if you have less than 5,000, it's still smart for you to buy stop loss. But there's two types of stop loss that you would purchase. You would purchase a specific and potentially an aggregate. A specific covers for each individual employee or each individual person that's on your health plan. It's not just an employee. So it could be an employee spouse, it could be employee children, whatever the case may be. It's for each individual person that's covered. All right. And I'll go through some examples on the next slide when we walk through a visual. And then on your aggregate, this is covering all of your employees as a whole, right? And so the specific, let's walk through these. I like this visual. Okay. So as we look at the left side, all of those blues, and we'll say your specifics insurance picks up once you have claims above 50,000. All right. So think of it today, right? Like you have a deductible for your employees. And if some of you are on an HRA or if they have an HRA, you're doing a version of self-funded today, right? So if you have $1,000 deductible, but you're an HRA and you're reimbursing down to 500, okay, you're taking on a layer of self-funding. It's no different than what we're saying here on the specific side and also the aggregate. On the specific, we're saying on each individual employee, instead of maybe that 500, let's take that up to 35 or 40 or 50, depending on your size, will depend on what specific deductible makes sense and your risk appetite. There's a handful of variables that will go into that, but that's where you're purchasing the specific to cover each individual on your health plan. All right. You can see these red. So there's red bar on there. Those would be claims that are above the 50,000 in my example that we're sharing. So you have 3 claimants there that breached. All of these blue claimants that are below the 50,000, all right, you want to buy aggregate insurance to protect you as an employer for all of those. So let's use the example of 100 employees. All right, you're buying your specific at 50,000, and maybe you're buying your aggregate policy to cover claims up to $1 million. Okay. So that way you have protection. So you don't want all of your 100 employees having 50,000 in claims and then you're paying for it, right? You want to buy the aggregate. And so aggregate is a great way to protect your max exposure. That's often what it's referred to as max exposure. So think of specific as individual, aggregate as group. All right. So where does the aggregate get calculated, right? Like how does that come about? If you're going to an insurance company, they will calculate it for it. If you're going to some of the consultants, they may have an actuarial department or an underwriting department that'll calculate it for you. Basically what your aggregate, which often referred to as aggregate factors or claim fund, is known as your claims below your specific. And they'll ultimately come up with an expected number. So let's use that still, keep that same example going. If you had $1 million of expected claims, that's where they're coming up with the factors by all of your employees to say it's $1 million. You would have to take a corridor if you wanted to buy aggregate insurance. All right. And an insurance company doesn't want to sell you right at expected. They don't want to say, okay, if you're expected to have $1 million claims, if you have $1.1 million that we're paying, right? They want you to take a little bit of risk. So often they'll say take a 10%, 15%, 20 or 25. That's what's called the corridor. Okay. Again, all of this is part of your policy when you move into a self-funded or a level funded, I should say, policy. So if it's at a 10%, at that $1 million example, it would be 1.1. That's where the aggregate policy would pick up. If it's a 20%, it'd be 1.2. That's where the insurance would pick up. One thing I will say about aggregate insurance is when you look at the two, typically aggregate is less expensive. It's because they believe often that they will not pay for claims or that they will be responsible for claims. It's a good rule of thumb. Cheaper the insurance is, the less likely they think something's going to occur. We're flying through a lot of terminology. So again, if you have questions, feel free to fire them over here. One of the key things that I want to make sure everyone's aware of is the contract terms. These are extremely important when you are considering a self-funded plan. And again, when you're thinking about the right time of entering a self-funded plan, or you've already been self-funded and you're looking at going, staying in a self-funded, you want to look and understand that these contract terms. So the first term or the first period here is incurred. The second is paid. This is often expressed in months. Okay, so incurred and paid. And we're going to go through some examples, but a 12-12. So when you're buying that insurance policy for the specific and the aggregate, you'll see a term up there, or you see a 12-12 contract. What that means is claims incurred and paid within 12 months. So I'm going to walk through an example on each of these here on the next slide. But another term that you'll often hear, if you're already self-funded, is called run-in, which basically is covering 3 months in this example of a 15-12, 3 months prior to you going to a new contract. They will cover you for those claims. All right. Now, if you're going self-funded for the first time and you're not sure you want to stay self-funded, you may want to look at a 12-15 contract. A 12-15 includes run out. All right. This example of 12-15 is saying for your first 12 months, any claim can be paid for 15 months. All right. Again, I'll walk through some examples of these top 3. And then lastly, a paid 12 is a contract that's out there that's basically saying from the moment you went self-funded with this carrier, all claims back will be paid within the 12 months. It's the strongest contract. It's the maximum contract. One thing, just clarity on these, sometimes, and something to look for is any type of games that are played in this is sometimes run in or run out limits. Again, insurance carriers are looking at it and they're setting it the price in their best interest, not necessarily employer's best interest. So something you should always be looking for. Part of the reason I wanted to explain this today is just because this is some of the trends that we're seeing that we want to be mindful of when we're looking at and evaluating whether or not we should go self-funded. Okay, so here's some of the examples of it. The 12-12 contract. So I'm going to throw out a few. If you had a claim January 2nd and it was paid not until March of the same year, the 12-12 contract would cover that. Okay, if you had a claim that happened in December of 2023 but wasn't paid until January of 2024, it would not be covered on a typical 12-12 contract. It would be covered on a run-in contract, all right, because you have 3 months prior. Now, if you had that same claim in December but not paid until the next year, so in 2025, if it happened in December of 2024, you would want a run-out contract. Okay, that's if you're not staying self-funded, or if you're looking at just a 12-15 contract. So again, there's nuances here, something to evaluate when you're truly looking at the time, and really when you're looking at understanding the concept, right? This is, I will say, again, my goal is that everyone understands the terminology. It's a lot to cram here in 45 minutes, but when you're thinking about it, it's really relative when you're looking at your health plan and typically outside of the renewal process. So you want to look at, obviously, all of these different things that are impacting and specifically related to your health plan and where you want the future of your health plan to go. So just in summary on understanding the concept, right? All these blue columns are your fixed cost. The green, and why employers are going self-funded, is because they want to look at their claims data, right? They know long-term, which we'll get into some of the probabilities, is that in their expected years, they have cash, they save money and compared often to the market. In their great performing years, they save significantly. One thing that we see in the self-funded environment is when COVID hit, there was a significant just decrease of claims. All the employers that were self-funded saw that benefit, right? All the employers that were fully insured, the carriers saw that benefit, right? Now, we did see the reverse of that coming out of COVID, right? The claims ticked up for some groups. So in that case, their claims may have been exhausted in the self-funded environment, but they still saved more being in a self-funded environment than being fully insured. So when is it not a smart time, the right timing, right, to look at a self-funded plan? I would say that I feel like a lot of times when employers are evaluating a self-funded plan is when it's too late. When they're faced with a significant increase, they're not sure what to do, right? There's pain. And it's unfortunate, right? Like the employer market that's receiving single-digit increases or no shop offers, it could be a good time for them to evaluate self-funding. I'm not saying that across the board, right? When you get a 60% increase, it may be the right time to move self-funded. But to cram all of this and especially when you've been fully insured for years, to think about self-funding, it's a lot to undertake, especially in a short window, right? You get a 60% increase in 60 days. It's a challenge for employers to evaluate and look at it and see whether or not it's in their best interest to move self-funded. So this is kind of the way that I like to think about it, right? When is the right timing? As an employer, when you have the opportunity to spend and look at your health plan and say, am I ready to gain control over my health plan, right? I'm paying $1 million. Where's that money going, right? When I have the ability to unbundle, to go through all of the fixed components that we talked about. All of those, again, are built into your fully insured plan. You're just unbundling. You get to choose the network. You get to choose control over your benefit plan design. You have access to claims data, and you get to evaluate your wellness and anything that you're doing today, right? Like any type of cost containment solutions that are out there, they truly can benefit your health plan, right? Implementing a wellness or cost containment solution today in a fully insured environment is great. Might be great for employee morale, but it's really hard to evaluate it and say, am I seeing a true return on that investment? Access to the claims data, that will give it to you. That'll show you exactly what's happening. And then ultimately, that third bullet point I think is so crucial, right? I think the biggest frustration as employers have is when they get that 60% increase, what's their biggest impact? Well, it's increasing the deductible, right? Like just throwing a higher deductible out there, doesn't always help, right? Just that may not be what's driving your health plan. What could be driving your health plan could be especially pharmacy. You could look at the deductible on that. You could look at the percentage of copay, whatever it may be, whatever your benefit reimbursement rate is. You have the ability to change that in a self-funded environment. So definitely, I like to say if you want to just leave control into the employers, stay fully insured. If you want to gain control of your health plan, definitely look at moving in a self-funded environment. Now, it's also got to make sense financially, right? Like you got that 60% increase. You can't just stomach a 60%. You got to look at it and see whether or not it makes the most sense for you to move self-funded. So I will often say the numbers got to be there, but you also got to believe the concept, right? And I'll go into a little bit more of why you want to believe the concept here on our last slide. But I think it's so crucial when you're evaluating self-funding that you do it thinking long-term. You want to look at it at the current year, whether it's the right time, okay? But you also want to look at it long-term. So this is an example that we like to put together. And again, we do this at no cost for employers to provide a proposal to say, what would my claims be if I went self-funded? Or what are my claims projected for next year if I'm already level funded and you want to look at self-funded? All right. So in this example here, what we're saying is your expected claim amount. You can see that 100% line. This is just an example. This is not, this is just a page in our exhibit that we share for every employer. But basically what we're showing here, this is a small employer that I pulled, that their claim fund is 100,000. This is a relatively small employer. We're showing here just across the board, 100%. Basically what we're saying is that they're expected and that they'd have a potential surplus of almost 10,000. In comparison to where they are fully insured or level funded today, it's a $12,000 savings, right? That's step one, looking at it on their first year, but then thinking long-term is the crucial part. So in this example, we're saying that that gray column is expected. The bottom is the maximum. We want to show them the true max advantage. And then ultimately, we'd love to tell you that you're going to have no claims, but that's not realistic. You're going to have some claims. So we show the claim level at 65% is kind of your best case scenario. And in that case, this was compared against a self-funded, level funded plan, but you can see the savings there. So this is just an example that I like to walk through on every proposal that we provide. Again, if the fully insured carrier is buying your business as an employer, it's good to have this analysis to know whether or not they're underpricing. And in this market, it can happen, right? It's happening. So you got to think whether or not do I want to stay in that environment? Do I want to kind of ride that roller coaster, or do I want to look at a self-funded, level funded plan? So when you're thinking about it, think long term. If you have the ability to project it out a few years, think about whether or not staying fully insured, self-funded, and what has my average increases been? One key point that I would challenge you is, what has your average increases been prior to negotiations and also prior to any deductible or plan design changes, right? And if you look at that track record in comparison to self-funded, again, it goes back to my first slide. There's a reason why employers 1,000 enrolled or greater have been doing it for years. It's because they know long-term they're going to save money self-funded versus fully insured. So again, that's why we're seeing this migration down. Self-funded is because of a lot of these new products. And again, you want to project this with a long-term mindset. So that's really when it comes down to the right timing. I like to think about it like this. All right, I take everything totally outside of the insurance realm and trying to bring this back, okay? And for those of you that love Comcast, I'm sorry. For those of you that are not familiar with Comcast, Comcast is the 800-pound gorilla that controls the cable TV industry on the East Coast, the majority of the East Coast, I should say. All right, Comcast, when you go to them and you want to purchase TV, any type of cable TV, all right, they give you a package. You don't get to choose and pick your television shows. YouTube, when it first came out, you could. All right, so for those of you that hate YouTube TV, this is just an example. All right, don't shoot me. But when it first came out, that was the position that internet TV was taking, is pick the channels you want. And for me and my family, we watch two channels, Disney and ESPN. That's it. We don't watch anything else. Okay. And so I loved internet TV when it first came out because I was only paying for 2 channels. And that's really what I think about when you think about self-funded versus full insured. If you want to pay somebody for all of the things that they have and they offer, all right, maybe the Comcast world is the solution for you. If you would rather pick and choose, okay, what you want and have data into each one you want, maybe, you know, the YouTube is the right solution for you. It's changed significantly. So we can have a sidebar at the end of this on that. But that's the self-funded world, right? You have the ability to dive in and pick and choose what you want as an employer. So probably lost everybody on that one. So just kind of in summary, what I like to think about is if you want to gain control over your health plan, that should be the first question you should ask yourself, whether it's the right timing. If it's the right timing and you want to gain control and you have the resources to do it, definitely recommend you move into a self-funded, level funded chassis. All right. I would, again, focus concept over rate sale. All right. Any given year, you can have a carrier come in and buy your business on a full insured basis, especially when you're performing well. All right. That's because they know they're going to win. All right. As you, an employer, you know you're going to win self-funded long term. That may not be 1 year. You know, it may take a few years. And this is the way that we often look at it as it relates to our groups. And I'll jump back a slide because we got a little bit of time. But when you think about it on a 7-year cycle. And we often think this way, is that it's not just thinking, it's statistics. 2 years are bad performing years, right? Those are years where you've gone into your aggregate or over your maximum. You have 3 good years. That means those are 3 where you're sitting in a surplus that's better than expected. And then you have 2 break even, which is right at expected, which typically is better than you would be if you were in a full insured environment. So again, that kind of goes hand in hand with this slide. What we're saying here is our historical performance. 74% of our groups are performing better than maximum. Okay, 26 are performing over the maximum. So it's right in line with those odds that we're talking about. And those 26 are not the same as 26 year over year. It's different groups. And the smaller you are, the more volatile you are, where you're going to have great peaks and in valleys, basically where your claims are down significantly and then they trickle back up. Again, all the more reason you want to look and analyze what you're purchasing from a stop loss standpoint. So just in summary, I would say the right timing is for you when you think it's appropriate and you think you have the ability to gain control over your health plan and ultimately dive into the data and see what's truly driving your health plan. So with that, I wanted to leave some time here for Q&A. I think we've left about nine minutes here. We got a question here. Okay. How can producers comply with 40 PS 310 if a level funded or captive insurer is not licensed? That is a great question, and one that I am not an expert on, but I will. We have one thing at Benecon, we have an amazing compliance department. I would say one thing that often stop loss is regulated is in the casualty side. So as definitely as you're looking at health plans, it's not always that your health insurance is licensed. It covers you as you're looking at captives or stop loss. So something to consider as a producer, but I will have to circle back on that.
If that person wants to either email me or Britt directly, that was an anonymous one, feel free so that we can try and help you out. But yeah, Britt can take that back maybe and help answer that question for that attendee.
I love it. I love challenging questions. Keep firing. I love to learn every day.
And I know it takes a couple minutes to actually type a question, so we do have some extra time. So if there are questions, please feel free to get those in the Q&A.
One thing, Haley, I would just want to add, because I think that's a valid point, is definitely do your research on when you're looking at self-funded or level funded carriers, right? They can enter and exit the market. And what we saw this year was a significant national carrier exit the market, right? That happens more frequently in the self-funded space. So you want to look at their track record. You want to look at their AM Best rating as well. And definitely want to make sure that they're licensed to do business in your state. So, all things to consider and questions to ask. But whether you're fully insured or self-funded, you should be asking those questions as well.
And Tom, I know you said you'd like to be sharing these slides. Everyone should be getting this recording tomorrow via email, but we can contact you directly to get just the slide deck if that's more helpful. So we'll have all the information from Britt to share.
You can remove that YouTube Comcast, Tom. Well, one other thing I mentioned just at the start is we don't want you to not, if you're seriously considering self-funding, there's UBA has an incredible resource, whether it's the consultants, our alliances that are here to support you. So whatever we can do to help educate on the self-funded topic that specifically helps an employer understand, we want to be here. So don't make a decision because you're not informed on the product. Make a decision what's in your best interest. So always willing to help here from our end and work alongside a lot of our UBA consultants as well.
And if anybody happens to think of a question afterwards, actually, we just did get one.
The spreadsheet on the numbers slide contrasting fully insured on the left side to the self-funded on the right side. That spreadsheet that I shared was actually a comparison against carrier level funded. So that's why the numbers didn't look exactly. I'll pull for the slides to be handed out. It's a comparison that shows claim level. Actually here, I'll jump back for a second. So typically on the left side shows what we're saying their net claim liability. That's the actual employer's net claim liability. The claim fund is funding at the worst case scenario. Okay. The potential surplus is the difference between their worst case scenario versus their net claim liability. The other fixed costs and ACA fees, that's all of your admin that's built in. That's all of your, Affordable Care Act fees, your PCORI fee, things like that. The net effective cost is your annual net effective cost. So that's truly what you're paying for the year. Okay. And then on the far right is projected self-funded, level funded. That was a self-funded example. Probably, again, I wanted to make sure it wasn't any employer group. This was just one we pulled as a sample. And so that's comparing the different levels versus the level funded product. I'll use a different example in comparison to fully insured just to help everybody out for that and clean this up.
If anybody happens to think of questions once we jump off this call, feel free to send them my way or over directly to Britt. We're happy to help answer questions. I know I often think of them a couple minutes after or a day later. So always here to help. And I know Britt is a wonderful resource and his team as well at Benecon. So we did just get one more. How can self-funding control costs when members have chronic conditions like hemophilia?
Yep. There are some specific facilities depending on, blood disorders are unfortunate. They are significant, large, ongoing claims. But there's, again, this is anonymous, so I don't know what area, but there's certain programs that are out there that specifically can help out individuals with hemophilia. Often we try, depending on the area, to tend to look at whether there's specific blood centers that can help, that you can negotiate a set price with, things like that, to help with the transfusions. But that is a challenging one. It's also challenging if you're fully insured. It's going to be in your plan every year. So, it's sometimes better to know the exact cost versus just leaving it fully insured to process claims as on their own chassis. So different things. There's some new things popping out too, which I'm happy to share probably after January once it's been approved.
Well, I know we have just a couple minutes here, so while I still have most everyone, I just want to thank Britt for your thought leadership and sharing your expertise today, and thank all of the UBA partner firms and their clients who joined us today. Our next webinar is September 17th, and I know Britt touched on it very briefly about level funded today, but Allstate will be presenting about more details on what level funded plans are. So if you need to know more information, feel free to reach out directly to your UBA partner firm or to me here directly at UBA. Again, so thank you everybody for attending, and we look forward to you joining us next month.
Thanks all.